Welcome everyone to Keep It Classy Tech. This is not my review of the TCL R646, but it is going to highlight some issues that I've had with it, mostly to do with Dolby Vision or VRR in gaming. Also some other weird bugs, like here it won't let me actually change the picture mode. And then I've had issues where if you hit the settings button on the remote, it doesn't open the settings, it goes to the home page. I've also had issues where I'm playing a game in HDR and then it will just kick me out of HDR, and when you do that on the Xbox, then not only does it switch down to SDR, but it has like a weird bug that makes it even darker, so you pretty much have to reload everything in order to get it back. Alright, but here I'm showing that I have Dolby Vision Bright and Dark set up with the same settings, and when I first turned on this TV and started testing, hearing FOMO say that it's even brighter or as bright as the QN90A, and I'm like, what is going on? Because I'm not seeing that. So in Dolby Vision, this is an issue on Dolby Vision side, however this TV seems to be more affected by it because the highlights are taking a bigger hit when there's a mismatch. So typically Dolby Vision Dark would be the more accurate setting. However, on this TV, if the setting isn't matching the content correctly, so like if you go to Dolby Vision Bright, you can see the highlights even dim down, everything dims down, but that's dependent on the show or the content that you're watching. So on Sweet Tooth, it needs to be Dolby Dark to actually be brighter, and on the other TVs I've seen, the highlights were usually about the same, but on this one, the highlights just aren't getting pushed. So here on Our Planet, you can see that sun highlight staying pretty much the same regardless if it's bright or dark, and bright is raising the midtones, which is typically what you would see. However, it also blows out the sun a little bit more, which is the side effect from it. So this is normally what I would see. And then you come over to The Witcher. Well, now going from dark to bright brightens everything, highlights, midtones, everything. So pretty much if you're watching Dolby Vision on this TV, you're going to have to, every different show or movie you watch, toggle back and forth and see what effect it's having. And again, that is more of an issue with Dolby Vision. It's just the way the local dimming on this TV is working, or the algorithm, it's just not pushing the highlights as much on some of the content when the setting is mismatched to that content. So I'm going to switch over to gaming, and we're going to start with VRR on. You can see where it says not compatible with Dolby Vision, however that's not exactly the case. So I'm going to start out with 4K, 120 Hz, VRR, Dolby Vision toggle, like everything turned on. Now the TV does not support Dolby Vision at 120 Hz, so when you try that, it will switch over to HDR10. Now this TV has a very convoluted gaming setup, so enabling certain functions is going to disable others in certain settings, and there's just a lot of problems going on here. However, when it is set up correctly, it is actually pretty good. So I'm going to go through each and every scenario and show every step along the way, so it is going to be kind of a longer video, just to really in-depth go over all of this. Now if you don't feel like watching the whole thing and you just want to know the end point, don't use Dolby Vision, don't use VRR on this TV. Now if you want to know why, stick around and watch. So I'm going to start out here with the Xbox, setting up the HDR, HGIG, set the black just to pure black. Both of the brightness patterns go all the way left, then 13 clicks to the right, puts it at 950 nits, which is where the patterns go all white. Now I'm going to be using Destiny, which is not HGIG, and it does have its own slider, so I will do that as I make changes. So I'm going to go through with, again, everything turned on, and then I'm going to turn off VRR, then turn off Dolby Vision, switch from 60 Hz to 120 Hz back and forth with all the settings, and you'll see why you have to pretty much test everything, because if you want certain things to work, you're going to have to give up others. Alright, so let's launch Destiny with everything turned up. Xbox is set to 120 Hz, and I know there's going to be some people in the comments who will always say this, but Destiny's only 60 FPS. But when you set the console to 120 Hz, it's going to duplicate the frames and output a 120 Hz signal. Anyway, so with everything turned on, it switches to HDR10. So this is 120 Hz HDR10 with VRR. You can see the posterization, and there's no adjustable gradation setting in HDR10 gaming. And this is also not as bad as the posterization is going to get, because I'm pretty sure the TV is not even doing 120 Hz output with VRR, which we'll get to in a minute. So now I'm setting the brightness for the game appropriately, turning the aperture back up on the camera, and then now I'm going to go through the settings that are available when you're at 4K 120 with VRR. So you do get dynamic tone mapping, but that's it. Dynamic contrast doesn't work, black stretch doesn't work, micro contrast doesn't work, and you'll see that the local dimming setting just isn't even here. So whenever you have VRR on, it's going to eliminate the local dimming setting, and when you're at 120 Hz, the black stretch and the dynamic contrast and the micro contrast, all those, they're there, but they don't do anything. And also, here's a oddity of this TV. I don't understand why there's such a wide adjustable range for black level, when going from 50 to 49 makes a change, 48 makes no change, 47 makes a change, 46 and 45 don't make a change. So you pretty much have to go 50, 49, 47, 44. Any of the other ones aren't doing anything. And that's regardless of the settings. That's just how the TV is. So you can see black stretch does nothing, dynamic contrast did nothing, micro contrast doing nothing. When in HDR10, I do recommend setting it to the gamma setting of 2.4 to help the black levels drop. And then with VRR, because there's no local dimming, gotta drop the black level down to 47, and it's still not very black. And now here, underneath, right there where I'm putting that, and it says tower, you should be able to make out those letters right there where it says tower. But it is completely blown out. So whenever VRR is on, it's going to blow everything out as well. And you lose brightness, because this is not as bright as the TV can be. This is not as bright as the other settings are. So you're sacrificing brightness, and right here, I immediately noticed something was off. The aiming is way wonky. It goes from like feeling like you're stuck in mud to then just flying across the screen. So what I'm thinking is happening is it's dropping to 60 Hz. If anyone has seen what's going on with the X900H with the MediaTek chipset, its VR update, it's saying 120 Hz, but it's actually only showing 60. So I think this is doing similar. If you look at the sign on the wall right there, it's not smooth. The aiming feels horrible. It's just, the input lag is definitely higher than it should be at 120 Hz, and it just feels very, very weird. There's also overdrive issues. There's issues with inverse ghosting. So I'm going to turn off variable refresh rate and then go back without changing anything else. So now we're just going to have 4K, 120 Hz, HDR, again, because it's not going to do Dolby Vision at 120, and no VRR, and just go through the same thing again. And you can see all the check marks, but it's that doesn't really mean much when they don't work, or at least not the way they should. Alright, so disabled Dolby Vision for gaming on the Xbox, even though I didn't need to. Just went ahead and did, just to make sure that it's going to stay in HDR10. It's not tricking the TV. The TV's not having to go from Dolby Vision to HDR or do anything weird. Alright, and the other thing is, like I mentioned earlier, that was the way the settings should pop up, is that little window in the top right, and then you pick what you want when you hit the settings button. But a lot of times when you hit settings button, it goes to the home page of the TV, not what you want. Anyway, so you can see we now have our local contrast setting back. You can see it does make an effect, so it is working at 4K 120 HDR. Micro contrast is not working, does nothing. You'll see later what change it does make, and it is visible. Black stretch, this is the one that no matter what doesn't really seem to be doing anything. I don't see anything, but I'm sure it's actually working. It's just a very subtle thing. when at 60 hertz, not at 120. And again, dynamic contrast not working, and you can see the black level, we're now at 49 because the local dimming's working. Here you can see where it says tower, it's not blowing it out. Long story short, I'm just going to recommend you play at 4K 120 hertz because here you got your brightness, you got local dimming. You're missing a few settings compared to 60 hertz, but you're getting much better input lag, and it looks really good like this. So if you're going to get this TV to play games on, that's what I would suggest you do. 4K 120 HDR. Give up a couple, like the dynamic contrast setting, which you shouldn't be using anyway. And the micro contrast setting would be nice to have, but it's not that big a deal. You can see there's extremely minor, just regular ghosting like this, and I mean extremely minor. You can barely notice it at all. But there's no inverse ghosting when VRR is off. The game feels like it should. It's very responsive. The aiming is back to normal. However, you do have posterization here, and compared to what we were seeing before with VRR, I would say it's just a little bit worse here. But again, I think that's because the VRR actually isn't really doing 120 hertz, or I don't even know if I would say that it's worse, it's just different. Like, these bands seem a little bit bigger. So either way, it doesn't look great. But that's kind of an issue with all TVs right now with HDR and 120 hertz. So now you drop down to 60 hertz. VRR is still off. And now I'm going to turn Dolby Vision on. So now we're going to see what the Dolby Vision gaming looks like at 60 hertz without VRR. Remember that the TV says VRR is not supported with Dolby Vision, but we'll come back to that after this one. So when you load up the game, you're going to see it says Dolby Vision in the corner. Now we're going to have to redo the brightness stuff, and you're going to see in Dolby Vision you can't change the picture mode, and your settings are much more limited. Now, because we are not in VRR, we do get local contrast, but that's it. And the gamma setting, remember I was using 2.4 for HDR, well, that makes it way too dark for Dolby Vision, so you'll want to use 2.2 probably. All the other settings are the same, except when you come to clarity, you'll see that you now have processing. This is bad. This is why it's not actually going into game mode. If you remember earlier when we were on the movie side, there was Dolby IQ, Dolby Bright, Dolby Dark, and Dolby Game. You don't get those options now. You just got to trust that it's in game mode, and it's not. And if it is, it's a very bad game mode because it allows processing and the input lag is very high. And I see when I adjust the brightness in the game, I just had to move the slider all the way. And then Dolby Vision will do its tone mapping, and it does an alright job, although it's just not quite as bright as it was in HDR. But nothing's really blown out, so not a big issue there. However, the problem here is immediately obvious, very high input lag. Now, I'm not talking, Sony Dolby Vision movie mode 150 milliseconds input lag. It's not that terrible, but it is definitely bad. It's definitely not good for a game mode or playing games. I mean, you can see the delay. I can completely move my finger off the trigger before it fires. Maybe some casual games could be played like that, but anyone playing a shooter, racing game, anything like that would not want to play with that input lag. Now, because you do get the processing features though, you get the gradation setting, and you can see how it really clears up a lot of that posterization. However, I don't see a difference between low and high really. I also don't really see any negative effects. So you could run high if you're going to use Dolby Vision gaming, which I really wouldn't. So now we're going to try Dolby Vision with VRR, and this one is interesting because it says it doesn't work, but we're going to see pros and cons here. So load up the game. We have VRR enabled. Look in the top corner, it says Dolby Vision, and then your settings. The local dimming setting is now gone. You still have your clarity settings. Also, I forgot to mention, when in Dolby Vision, It also had the motion settings on by default, but I did turn those off, so make sure you do that as well. You can see again with VRR that it's completely blowing out. It wasn't doing that before with Dolby Vision. You load in, we've lost a lot of brightness. However, the input lag is normal. Like, it's good for gaming. I mean, at least as good as 60 Hertz is going to get, but it's certainly better. Well, why is that? Well, it's the VRR is forcing it into a actual game mode. And on the clarity page, you'll see that the noise reduction settings and those processing features are gone. The only one left was the gradation, which doesn't affect the input lag. So it did actually put it into a real game mode now. However, look at that tree. That tree that I pointed at as I move back and forth. That inverse ghosting is horrendous. And the camera's not even picking up half of what I was seeing in person. Like, this is completely unplayable because of how bad the inverse ghosting is. So I cannot recommend playing this TV with VRR in any situation, and I cannot recommend playing it in Dolby Vision unless you're like playing a really casual game and you have VRR off and you're at 60 Hertz and you just want the gradation setting. But that's it. But even then, I think you would have a better experience in HDR10 having the other visual options that you get, because if you're at 60 Hertz, you don't really need the gradation setting anyway, because the posterization issue really only happens at 120. So there's really no need or any real reason to be choosing Dolby Vision or VRR being turned on this TV, because you take just massive hits everywhere. So turning off VRR, turning off Dolby Vision, and now setting the TV to 60 Hertz, this is where you get pretty much all of your visual quality settings. So if you want the best looking image, this is what you would have to do. However, you do get a little bit higher input lag. It's around 15 milliseconds at 60 Hertz versus 5 at 120. So again, I would recommend doing 120, forcing it on the Xbox. If you have an Xbox, if you're on PlayStation, you can't really do that. But see, dynamic tone mapping obviously working. Local contrast, we have that, it's working. And then micro contrast, now you can actually see it making an effect. It's it's fairly subtle, but it's enough that you can see it. Black stretch, again, this is the one that I don't really see doing anything, but I'm pretty sure it's working. I think it's just so subtle that it's a circumstance if you're going to notice it. And then dynamic contrast makes a very big setting or changes. So that one's noticeable. And that's probably the one that most people would want to turn on. It is not going to be accurate, obviously, but it's going to give you more mid-range punch, which a lot of people like. So I think that's the main reason people would choose the 60 Hertz option over 120, is to be able to turn that on. You can see it's not as bad blowing it out as VRR was, but having that on does blow out your highlights a little bit. But it does give a higher contrasty look. So for gaming, do what you want to do. You can see that just really bright image now. I have not adjusted the camera through this other than like setting up the brightness page so you can see it, but every time I would put the aperture right back. So whole video was shot in 4K 60, shutter speed 60, aperture 5.6, and ISO at 640, so that you could see any changes in brightness. Camera wasn't moved, it was all shot in one take. So it may not blow out as much as it looks like it is right here. It's just that it's too bright for the camera to capture, and it would need to be adjusted, but if I did that, then you wouldn't really be able to tell. Anyway, so 4K 60, it feels fine. It's not as smooth as the 120 Hertz. So personally, if it were me, I would just be setting it to 120, no VRR, no Dolby Vision, and give up those 3 or 4 settings that you lose at 120. But you still get local dimming, which is the main thing that you want. and you get the dynamic tone mapping, which if you're playing a game in HGIG, you would want that off. But if you're playing a game that doesn't support HGIG, then you have that on, because if you turn it off, you lose pretty much all your brightness. So it just completely dims down. Local contrast, just go ahead and keep it on high. And micro contrast, again, this is one that you got to give up for 120, but it's not that big a deal. And then for the black level, when at these settings with 120, I would use either 49 or 47. I still need to go through and do full measurements, calibration, everything for the review, which is going to be coming fairly soon. So keep an eye out for that. That's going to be the end of this video. Thank you all for watching. I hope this helps some of you. And if you liked it, if you could please press like, and I'll catch you in the next one.